February 20th, 1943. North of the Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. No official battle report could ever fully convey what German tank commanders witnessed that morning. What they saw did not fit any rule they knew, nor any doctrine the Wehrmacht believed possible. Across the dusty, smoke-choked landscape of North Africa, American M4 Sherman tanks executed coordinated maneuvers that seemed to defy logic itself. 5 Sherman tanks, separated by shattered terrain, folds of ground and ridgelines that completely blocked visual contact, advanced toward German positions with uncanny precision. There were no signal flags waving in the air, no flares bursting above the battlefield, and no motorcycle dispatch riders racing between vehicles. Yet the tanks moved as if bound together by an invisible thread, converging at exactly the right moments. Each vehicle instinctively covered blind angles the others could not see. Every crew appeared to know with certainty where their comrades were positioned and how they were moving. To the German commanders watching from inside their Panzer IVs, the scene was deeply unsettling. Their tanks were equipped with FUG-5 radios, considered advanced by the standards of the 1930s. But inside those steel hulls, communication was breaking down. Static overwhelmed the amplitude-modulated signals. Commanders struggled to hear even their own company leaders over the noise. The 10-watt German transmitters, once seen as cutting-edge, could barely reach a few hundred meters when tanks were on the move. Worse still, most German tanks were fitted only with receivers. They could listen, but they could not speak. They could not report what they saw. They could not call for help. The Americans, unknown to the Germans at that moment, were fighting with a form of technology the Wehrmacht did not even realize existed. Every Sherman tank carried a frequency-modulated radio. Each system used crystal-controlled tuning, delivered 25 watts of transmission power, and produced voice clarity that sliced through engine noise, electrical interference, and battlefield chaos as if none of it mattered. Just 80 miles from the assembly lines of Detroit, what would become one of the most decisive technological advantages of the Second World War was revealing itself. Not through thicker armor or larger guns, but through invisible electromagnetic waves linking every American tank crew into a single, coordinated whole. That transformation had begun quietly on July 22, 1941, when the United States Army standardized a new generation of tank radios, the SCR-508 and CR-528. These systems would soon become standard equipment for every American medium tank. At the very moment, German armored forces were driving deep into the Soviet Union, using tactics that depended heavily on radio communication between command vehicles. American engineers were solving a different problem entirely. At the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, teams of engineers were refining frequency modulation technology that would soon render German communication systems obsolete. Among them was Daniel E. Noble, who envisioned how FM radio could be applied to armored warfare, and Henryk Magnowski, the principal radio frequency engineer who overcame the brutal challenge of installing complex electronics inside the violent vibration-filled environment of a tank. Their final creation weighed 181 pounds and turned every Sherman tank into a node in what would become the world's first true battlefield communication network. At the heart of the system was the BC-604 transmitter, capable of generating 25 watts of output power. Operating between 20.0 and 27.9 MHz, it offered 10 preset channels, each stabilized by crystal control to prevent frequency drift. Paired with it were 2 BC-603 receivers, integrated into the CR-508 configuration, allowing commanders to monitor multiple radio nets at the same time, an ability that would prove decisive under fire. But the true revolution was not simply power or range. It was frequency modulation itself. FM technology, developed by Edwin Armstrong and licensed for military use, eliminated the static and interference that plagued amplitude-modulated systems. where German radios captured every electrical spark, engine pulse, and track vibration as noise. American FM radios delivered clear, intelligible speech, even amid artillery barrages and full-speed armored movement. This invisible advantage would soon reshape the battlefield. On November 8, 1942, Operation Torch carried American armored forces onto the shores of North Africa. Units of the U.S. 2nd Armored Division landed near Safi and Fadala, bringing with them not only Sherman tanks, but the CR-508 radio systems that would soon expose a critical weakness in German armored warfare. Opposing them was the Afrika Korps, the Wehrmacht's most experienced and battle-hardened armored force. Its reputation had been forged across deserts and steppes, yet beneath its tactical skill lay a severe communications handicap. German tank formations operated under strict limitations that shaped every aspect of their doctrine. A typical German tank platoon consisted of 5 vehicles. Of these, only 1 or 2 were equipped with full FUG-5 transceivers capable of both transmitting and receiving. The remaining tanks carried only FUG-2 receivers. They could listen to orders, but they could not reply. They could not report enemy movements, request support, or warn neighboring units of danger. This structure enforced a rigid hierarchy. Orders flowed one way, from the platoon leader downward. Subordinate tanks acknowledged commands not with words, but with movement. Communication was assumed through action, not dialogue. Once combat disrupted visual contact, coordination quickly degraded. The system carried a fatal vulnerability. Command tanks were easily identified by their additional antenna. When those vehicles were destroyed, entire platoons often lost the ability to coordinate altogether. Against an enemy where every tank could transmit, receive, and assume command responsibilities, this weakness became catastrophic. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, fought between February 14 and 24, 1943, provided the first large-scale demonstration of what American radio superiority meant in combat. Although the engagement is often remembered as a tactical defeat for U.S. forces, it revealed something far more unsettling to German observers. During chaotic fighting across a wide and fragmented front, scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division maintained coordination over distances exceeding 50 miles. Tank crews who had never trained together exchanged information, synchronized movements, warned one another of enemy threats, and called for artillery fire, all through clear FM radio communication. German signals intelligence units intercepted American transmissions and immediately noticed something unusual. Reports from the 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section described American radio traffic as exceptionally clear and well coordinated. Even more alarming was the realization that U.S. units maintained effective communication at ranges where German radios produced nothing but static. What disturbed German analysts most was the implication that every American tank appeared capable of full radio transmission. Not just command vehicles, but all of them. By contrast, German FUG-5 radios, operating on amplitude modulation within the 27.0 to 33.3 MHz range, were constrained by fundamental technical limitations. Their 10-watt transmitters struggled to reach 2 to 3 kilometers under ideal stationary conditions. Once tanks were moving, effective range often collapsed to a few hundred meters. Every ignition spark, every electric motor, every jolt of track against rock generated interference. Amplitude modulation had no effective means of filtering this noise. American frequency modulation did. In September 1943, when U.S. armored forces entered Italy, the terrain should have negated any radio advantage. Instead, it magnified it. Mountain valleys and ridgelines created severe multipath interference that rendered German AM radios almost unusable. FM radios, however, handled these conditions with far greater reliability. American tanks coordinated movements through mountainous terrain where visual signals were impossible, and German radios failed entirely during the advance toward Cassino. Platoons separated by ridgelines executed synchronized attacks with precision German doctrine insisted could only occur with direct line of sight. After-action reports from the U.S. 1st Armored Division described routine coordination at distances where German systems produced only noise. June 6, 1944, brought Sherman tanks ashore in Normandy. Their CR-508 radios immediately linked armored units to naval gunfire support, enabling levels of coordination impossible for German forces to replicate. Yet the hedgerow fighting revealed a dangerous gap. Tank radios could not communicate directly with infantry radios operating on different frequency bands. Infantry units used the CR-300, which worked in the 40 to 48 MHz range, completely incompatible with the tank's 20 to 27 9 MHz systems. This disconnect proved deadly in the bocage. German infantry armed with Panzerfausts could approach American tanks while nearby U.S. infantry had no means to warn the crews. American forces solved the problem with remarkable speed. Tank crews mounted E-8 field telephones inside ammunition boxes, welded to the exterior of their vehicles, and wired directly into the internal intercom system. Infantrymen could now communicate instantly with tank crews under fire. By the time Operation Cobra began in late July 1944, this simple innovation had revolutionized tank infantry cooperation. Between July 25 and 30, 1944, Operation Cobra revealed the full battlefield consequences of American radio superiority. Under the command of Major General Edward H. Brooks, the U.S. 2nd Armored Division coordinated more than 200 Sherman tanks through integrated radio networks that enabled a level of control never before seen in armored warfare. German defenders from the Panzer Lehr Division faced an opponent that seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of the battlefield. American tanks reacted instantly to threats reported by units miles away. Artillery fire missions, coordinated directly through tank radios, were delivered within minutes of target identification. What the Germans experienced was not simply speed, it was an enemy that appeared to know everything. The contrast between the two sides could not have been sharper. Panzer Lehr, once the Wehrmacht's premier armored formation, had been reduced to communication scarcity. Many of its tanks operated without radios at all, relying instead on hand signals and visual cues in terrain, where visibility often fell below 100 meters. The few radios that remained functional suffered from interference and limited range, making effective coordination nearly impossible. The irony was striking. Germany had been the pioneer of radio-based armored warfare. Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, had insisted on the importance of radio equipment in tanks as early as the 1920s. His book, Achtung Panzer, published in 1937, emphasized communication as the foundation of armored operations. Guderian understood that rapid maneuver warfare required reliable, continuous communication. Yet by 1943, German industry could no longer supply the radios that Guderian's own doctrine demanded. Production figures revealed the scale of the crisis. In 1943, Germany manufactured approximately 5,700 medium tanks, but produced fewer than 2 zero-fug transceivers. Many of those radios were allocated to command vehicles or assault guns, leaving regular tank units critically under-equipped. Entire formations went into battle with only a fraction of their vehicles capable of transmitting. Soviet tank forces suffered an even deeper communications deficit. Despite producing the T-34 in enormous numbers, most Soviet tanks entered combat without radios. Early war Soviet doctrine relied heavily on flag signals and prearranged plans, a system that proved disastrous against German forces in 1941. By 1943, Lend-Lease assistance began to alleviate some of these shortcomings. American radios, including CR-508 systems, were installed in Soviet command tanks. Even so, by the end of the war, only about 1/4 of Soviet tanks carried any radio equipment at all. The comparison highlighted the uniqueness of the American achievement. While the Soviet Union struggled to equip 25% of its tanks with radios of any kind, the United States achieved universal deployment of advanced FM systems. Motorola's factory in Chicago became a symbol of American industrial mobilization at its peak. Before the war, the company specialized in automobile radios. Converting to mass production of military communication equipment required complete retooling and the solution of unprecedented engineering problems. Each SAR-508 system consisted of two 748 individual components manufactured to extremely tight tolerances. The BC-604 transmitter alone contained 474 capacitors and 385 resistors. Crystal oscillators had to maintain frequency stability despite temperature extremes, mechanical shock, and continuous vibration. Production numbers tell the story clearly. In 1942, approximately 3,800 CR-508 family radios were produced. In 1943, output rose to 11,400 units. By 1944, production reached 24 units. Total wartime output exceeded 50 zero-tank radio sets. This manufacturing achievement ensured that all 49 324 Sherman tanks built during the war were equipped with sophisticated radio systems, an accomplishment unmatched by any other nation. The SCR-508's advantages extended well beyond frequency modulation. Crystal-controlled tuning allowed tanks to preset channels before combat and maintain alignment under the harshest conditions. German Fug-5 radios, dependent on variable capacitors, frequently drifted off frequency during operation. The system's dual receiver design allowed commanders to monitor both platoon and company command networks simultaneously. Orders flowed downward instantly, while commanders retained constant awareness of subordinate units. Integrated BC-606 intercom systems enabled every crew member to communicate internally. Gunners, loaders, and drivers could alert commanders to threats immediately. Throat microphones and noise-canceling headsets ensured clear communication, even during intense combat. Many German tanks lacked internal intercoms entirely, forcing crews to rely on physical taps or shouted instructions amid the roar of engines and gunfire. Power management further widened the gap. The SCR-508 could operate on either 12 or 24-volt systems, automatically adapting to available power. Its dynamotor power supply delivered stable, filtered current that eliminated electrical interference. German radios, drawing power directly from vehicle electrical systems, picked up every spark and fluctuation as noise. These technical advantages reshaped American armored doctrine. The U.S. Combat Command System, flexible task forces assembled for specific missions, was entirely dependent on reliable communications. American commanders could form ad hoc battle groups from multiple units, confident that radio compatibility would allow seamless coordination. German commanders, constrained by rigid organizational structures imposed by limited communications, struggled to comprehend this flexibility. During the Battle of Arrancourt in September 1944, the consequences of American communication superiority became impossible to ignore. The U.S. 4th Armored Division confronted multiple German panzer brigades, equipped with Panther tanks that were, on paper, superior in both armor protection and firepower. Technically, the Germans held nearly every material advantage. Yet, the outcome told a different story. American Sherman tanks, though individually inferior, operated as a fully connected force. Every vehicle could instantly report enemy sightings. Tank destroyer units received targeting data from Sherman crews they could not physically see. Artillery observers embedded in command tanks called in concentrated fire missions within minutes of identifying targets. Over the course of 3 weeks, the 4th Armored Division destroyed 281 German armored vehicles, while losing only 41 Shermans, a kill ratio of nearly 7-1. By any traditional measure of tank performance, this outcome should have been impossible. The decisive factor was not armor thickness or gun caliber. It was communication. Throughout the war, German intelligence repeatedly failed to grasp the true significance of American radio superiority. Combat reports acknowledged the effectiveness of American coordination, but consistently attributed it to superior training rather than superior technology. A captured German intelligence assessment from September 1944 stated, "American tank units demonstrate effective radio discipline and coordination. This appears to be the result of extensive training and rigid communication procedures." The report entirely missed the underlying cause. German tactical thinking never adapted to the reality that every American tank was fully connected. German forces continued to target supposed command vehicles based on antenna configurations, unaware that destroying one tank had little effect on American coordination. They planned ambushes under the assumption that American units would lose cohesion once separated, not understanding that radio contact preserved unity regardless of terrain or visibility. By March 1945, as American forces approached the Rhine River, communication superiority reached its peak. The capture of the Remagen Bridge demonstrated the speed and flexibility of American command and control. When elements of the U.S. 9th Armored Division discovered the Ludendorff Bridge still standing, radio reports reached 1st Army headquarters within minutes. Within an hour, divisions across the entire front were shifting their plans to exploit the unexpected opportunity. German forces, dependent on landline telephone networks that Allied aircraft systematically destroyed, could not respond with comparable speed. Their command structure lagged far behind events as they unfolded. American radio coordination transformed the bridgehead into an almost impenetrable defense. Tank platoons from different battalions integrated seamlessly, coordinating fire missions and movements through shared radio networks. German counterattacks, poorly coordinated due to communication breakdowns, arrived piecemeal and were destroyed one after another. In April 1945, the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket represented the culmination of American communication dominance. Armored columns from the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies executed a complex double envelopment, coordinated almost entirely through radio communication. Inside the pocket, approximately 325 German troops found themselves trapped, in part because their communication systems had collapsed. American fighter bombers, guided by radio-equipped forward air controllers, systematically destroyed German command and communication nodes. Wehrmacht units lost contact, not only with higher headquarters, but with neighboring formations as well. Coordination disintegrated. Field Marshal Walter Model's final messages before communication failure reflected the German predicament. No contact with adjacent units. No communication with higher headquarters. Fighting continues, but coordination is impossible. Beyond tactics and strategy, radio superiority profoundly shaped the psychological experience of armored warfare. American tank crews fought with the knowledge that they were never truly isolated. Even when physically separated, they remained connected through radio networks. Assistance, information, and coordination were always only a transmission away. German tank crews experienced the opposite reality. Isolation was the norm. Unable to communicate reliably, they fought fragmented battles within larger engagements, often unaware of the broader situation. Otto Carius, one of Germany's most successful tank commanders, later described these challenges in his memoir Tigers in the Mud. While he focused primarily on tactical issues, the underlying problem of limited communication ran through his experiences. The strategic consequences were immense. American advances in 1944 and 1945 maintained momentum in large part because radio coordination allowed rapid exploitation of opportunities. The U.S. Third Army's race across France depended on communication networks that sustained command and control across hundreds of miles. German commanders consistently underestimated American capabilities because they could not conceive of the level of communication superiority the Americans possessed. Heinz Guderian, serving as Inspector General of Armored Troops during the final phase of the war, eventually recognized the severity of Germany's communication crisis. But recognition did not bring solutions. In a memorandum dated December 1944, he acknowledged that American coordination effectively neutralized German advantages in armor protection and firepower. By that point, it was far too late. Following Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams conducted systematic evaluations of captured German armored equipment. Their findings confirmed what combat experience had already suggested. German tanks often possessed impressive guns and thick armor, but their communication systems were catastrophically inferior. U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report No. 176 concluded that German tank communication equipment lagged approximately 5 years behind American systems. The absence of frequency modulation, limited distribution of radios, and inadequate electrical suppression created vulnerabilities that proved decisive on the battlefield. Soviet evaluators reached similar conclusions. Granted access to captured German equipment, the Red Army chose not to replicate German radio designs. Instead, they studied and adopted American communication principles for post-war development. Production and deployment statistics illustrate the magnitude of the American achievement with striking clarity. The United States produced over 50 zero-tank radio sets from the CR-508, SAR-528, and CR-538 families. During the same period, 49, 324 Sherman tanks were manufactured. The deployment rate of advanced radio equipment reached 100%. Each system delivered 25 watts of transmission power. Frequency stability was maintained through crystal control to within 0.1%. Effective communication range reached approximately 7 miles while moving and extended to 10 to 15 miles when stationary. German production figures told a very different story. Approximately 6 0Fug-5 transceivers were produced, while Germany built roughly 12 0-medium and heavy tanks. Full transceiver deployment reached only about 20% of vehicles. German radios transmitted at 10 watts. Frequency stability fluctuated by approximately 1% due to variable tuning. Effective range, while moving, was often limited to half a mile or less, extending 2 or 3 miles only under ideal stationary conditions. The practical effects were measurable. Average response time for American artillery fire missions ranged from 3 to 5 minutes. German fire missions typically required 15 to 30 minutes. American armored units achieved near total coordination. German units, by contrast, operated with full communication capability in only a fraction of their vehicles. The implications extended far beyond World War II. The radio superiority embedded in the Sherman tank established principles that continue to govern armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry advanced digital communication suites, but the core concept remains unchanged: universal deployment and reliable coordination. The post-war German Bundeswehr rebuilt its armored forces with this lesson firmly in mind. Every Leopard tank manufactured carried comprehensive radio systems. A Bundeswehr training manual explicitly states that the defeat of technically superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles demonstrated that information dominance outweighs platform superiority. Modern conflicts have repeatedly validated this conclusion. During the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces with superior communication networks destroyed Iraqi armored units equipped with individually capable Soviet-designed tanks but inferior radios. In 2003, American forces once again demonstrated that network-centric warfare prevails over platform-centric warfare. The story of Sherman tank radio superiority represents a decisive victory in the electromagnetic spectrum. It proved more influential than improvements in armor thickness or gun performance. German tank crews fought much of the war unaware of this revolution. They observed American tactical effectiveness, but failed to recognize its technological foundation until it was too late. By the time German commanders understood that every Sherman tank possessed communication capabilities denied to most German vehicles, the outcome of the war was already sealed. The Wehrmacht's failure to recognize and address its critical communication weakness stands as one of the great intelligence failures of the Second World War. Despite repeated battlefield evidence, German leadership continued prioritizing superior individual platforms over collective coordination. In the end, American forces built not merely 49 324 Sherman tanks, but 49 324 interconnected nodes in the world's first armored battlefield network. The revolution in military affairs, often associated with modern network-centric warfare, truly began in 1942, when the first Sherman equipped with an ECR 508 radio entered combat. From that moment forward, warfare was fundamentally altered. The side with superior communication would defeat the side with superior weapons. Networks would overcome platforms. Connection would ensure survival, while isolation would lead to defeat. Invisible electromagnetic waves carried by CR 508 radios proved more powerful than the armor-piercing shells fired by German 88mm guns. Coordination, shared awareness, and collective action determined victory more reliably than individual technical superiority. German forces learned this lesson across 3 continents, too late to change the outcome. American tanks demonstrated that each vehicle was not just a weapon, but part of a unified system. A Sherman tank was never alone. It was connected to every other American tank on the battlefield. This invisible connection created a collective intelligence no individual German tank, regardless of its armor or firepower, could overcome. Communication, not steel, proved decisive.